Albert Einstein is quoted as saying, "Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one." How would you define reality? Things that you perceive with your senses? Have you ever sensed the presence of an angel or the dark presence of a demon? How about ghosts? Has anyone ever said to you, "Ghosts aren't real"? Are these things merely one of Einstein's illusions, or are they as real as anything you can see, hear, and touch? Today on Craving Answers, Craving God, let's talk about the reality of the spiritual realm. I'm Chuck Rathert with Aaron Miller. Aaron is the pastor of St. James Lutheran Church in Glen Carbon, Illinois. Well, Aaron, I've never seen an angel or a demon or a ghost, yet I contend that all three are real. There are some who would mock me for holding this so-called antiquated religious belief. Since we can't use science to prove the existence of the spiritual realm, are we stuck with a weak argument?
We're stuck with a weak argument if it's true that only things that can be proven by science exist. If so, then anything that doesn't...
Well, then we're done.
Well, if it's true that we are done, if it's true that only the material world is real.
There are people listening to us right now who are saying to themselves, well, yeah, that's true. Only things that can be proved by science are real.
Well, you can say that, but nobody actually really believes that. I mean, people really believe that their love for their kids is something bigger than anything that can be examined by a microscope or a test tube or some sort of medical test. Even people who say, well, yeah, my love for my kids involves neuroreceptors and dopamine and things like that, still know that there's something that's bigger than just a dopamine hit. When the joy of holding your kid for the first time, there's something that's more. I mean, these are all examples we've used before in here, but there's something. A sunset can be explained scientifically, but there's something going on when you see a sunset inside of yourself that can't be explained purely in terms of your body's biological reaction to the sight of the colors on the horizon. Yeah, I mean, if my goal is to prove the existence of angels or demons or ghosts or whatever, then it's not going to be very satisfactory. This is going to be a very short conversation. But if the story that guides my life is not philosophical materialism, but the story of the Bible, then there's plenty of room for a supernatural world that would include beings like angels and fallen angels.
Well, you're right. I can look at a sunset and I can perceive what I'm seeing, knowing that the Earth is rotating and it's orbiting the sun, and that the sun is now in the west and it's setting and the atmosphere does what it does to affect what I'm seeing. I can describe all that scientifically, and I can describe it emotionally. There are people who, where I live, where we have a very good view of the sunset. There are people who stop their cars all the time and get out and watch the sunset. It's very emotional for them. But those two things are experiences. I experience those things, and therefore I say that they're real. It's not the same with spiritual beings, angels, demons, or ghosts or whatever. That's not the same category.
Yeah, I mean, you could say, I didn't go to the Cardinal game last night, but I saw in the newspaper that they lost. There's certain sort of I guess a sort of a quasi-scientific reality to that newspaper report. Somebody saw it and then they wrote it down, and there was they typed it out into a computer, and then it went electronically through a bunch of wires. I have no clue what I'm talking about. And eventually gets to a printing press where it's printed out. And I still believe it. I wasn't there. I didn't experience it myself, but I've got this piece of communication in front of me that says it's so, which I've learned to trust, which is how we do with science. We learn to trust some parts of science, and other parts of science we think are suspect. Everybody does this. It's no substitute for actually going to the game. And so you're right. I mean, experiencing something, experiencing a sunset is different than believing in angels when you've never experienced an angel. But in both cases, they both come down to a certain framework of how you see the world and a level of trust in that framework. If you think that all there is material, you might say, "Oh, that sunset's beautiful," but it can't go much past in your mind that it can't go much further than the belief that, well, that's just my biological response to that. I was programmed by evolutionary impulses, or, there's something beneficial to my system that does that. Whereas if your story is one where there's more than just the natural, you can both appreciate the science and what it can tell you about it, but you can also appreciate the deep transcendent beauty. And so when I say that, like, the story that I subscribe to, the story that I want my life to be a part of is the story of the Bible, there's lots of room for things that are both received and experienced scientifically, also received and experienced personally, experientially. But in both cases, I trust that what I'm experiencing is real because it comports well with the story that I've subscribed to, which is the story of everything, the story of the Bible. I don't know if that helps anybody, but angels, there's lots of room in my own thinking for angels and fallen angels to exist because the story that I subscribe to makes sense with them in there. And somebody who's listening may have not experienced these things. Somebody who's listening, I would imagine there's lots of listeners who have experienced this, who have had some sort of experience with, maybe they called it a ghost. Maybe if they were, thinking religiously, or if it was like a really positive experience, they would call it an angel, who would say, "Oh yeah, I know. This my own personal experience matches up well with the story of the Bible too." So
do you believe in angels?
Yes.
Do you believe in demons?
Yes. Fallen angels. Yep.
Do you believe in ghosts?
Yes. I believe that people experience supernatural beings that aren't living humans.
Can you say that you ever had some kind of angelic experience, some kind of supernatural angelic experience upon which you can base your yes answer to my question?
I'm not sure.
Well, then that's weak sauce.
Well, secondarily, I know of a family right now whose house is haunted here in the town where I live. They say that it's haunted. I'm pretty convinced in conversations that what's happened is that there's some sort of a demon that's messing with them. I know of people who, we didn't plan for this. I'm just going to, out of my relationship with you, I'm going to turn this around to you, and you can shut this down if you want to, Chuck. But I know that your wife has had an experience in a bad situation with something that she feels like was angelic. I don't know. You want to talk about that?
Well, it's a long story, and I can let our listeners know what we're talking about here. We were in a bad car accident 20 years ago, rollover accident, and my wife and I and our 3 kids all in a van. The car turned over several times. There's no doubt that everybody could have been killed. All of us sustained some injuries, but they were minor. And while we were sitting in the median of the interstate highway, looking at the debris everywhere, and trucks and cars and people stopped to see if they could help, later on my wife said, "Did you see that Spanish lady that was talking to me?" And the 3 kids and I said, "No, we didn't see any Spanish lady. What are you talking about?" She says, "Yeah." She said, she came up behind me. I was sitting on the ground. She came up behind me and she said, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. You're all okay." And I think Debbie said something like, "Well, how do you know?" And she said, "We were following you." And none of the rest of us saw this. Debbie is convinced that she had an angelic visit there. I'm not going to say that she didn't, but I don't know if that rises to the level of reality that we get from looking at a sunset. It's sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And there's probably at least one person, Aaron, listening to us right now are going, "Oh, these guys, Well, who are these guys? These nuts who think that they've seen angels and believe in angels? Come on, we're in the 21st century now.
I'll tell you this. So I think that this is less and less the case. I won't go into too many details here, but I have a group of people who I'm friends with who are skeptical about Christianity. Not all of them, but some of them are skeptical about Christianity. A little bit of this, well, you believe this, guy gets killed and rises from the dead. That's, fairy tale stuff. These people love historical ghost walks in the town where I live. They love going, and they believe in them. They get the little, I don't know what all the stuff is, because I don't go on these because I believe in it too much. These transponders where they'll record voices, and one of them was saying, "Yeah, we were in this one historical building here in our town, and this voice was cussing at us on here. There's nobody there, and we're hearing this voice." So they believe in that stuff. They don't want to believe that Jesus died and rose from the dead. There's too much at stake to believe in that, but they will believe this spooky stuff over here. More and more people are less skeptical about things. I know there are still some hardcore materialists who are skeptical about that, but more and more people on the street are open to that, not yet open to God becoming a human, dying and rising from the dead. But I honestly, your comment about Debbie's story is, I wouldn't say she didn't experience it. That's kind of the story of a lot of Christians who've had something like that. And Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews says in chapter 13, make sure you don't, when you get a chance to show hospitality to somebody, make sure you do it, he says, because some people by doing that have entertained angels without being aware of it. And some people have experiences, a lot of people have experiences where they're kind of aware of it. It's just there's too much that's not making sense. Debbie sees this woman, but the other members of the family don't. The woman tells Debbie, "We know you're okay because we've been following you." I mean, there's other ways you could explain that, right? Maybe it's just some innocent, some woman who just innocently drove by and said some weird things that kind of made sense in the moment. Maybe Debbie got a nice little knock on the head there and she was hallucinating. But enough people have had experiences like this where they have entertained angels without being aware of it, that I think you're right. I would never say that, no, you didn't experience that. I
think that what you said before is also correct. I'm wondering if I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here. If we were to poll the next 100 people that we pass on the street corner and say, "Do you believe in angels?" I think the vast majority of them would say yes. Now, what that means when they say yes, what they think an angel is, well, that might be different. But I think that people in general believe in some kind of spiritual reality.
Right, yeah.
You agree?
Oh, yeah, especially if you said ghost. Do you believe in ghosts? I think you would get, there's so many shows on really crummy cable networks that, show marathons of these shows in the middle of the night, ghost hunter shows and haunted house shows. But people really believe in this stuff. And I'll just, to connect this back to what we're talking about too, I was watching one of these shows one time, and it was actually when I was away from the faith, and I was up late, got home late from work one night, and I had one of these ghost hunter shows on, and they were in this creepy house, and they had gotten some footage of these beings standing there, real sort of hazy, whatever, with their special photographic equipment. I don't know what to make of all that, but they were talking to a priest about it. They interviewed a priest. Bring the priest in, that'll be kind of spooky. The priest talking about ghosts. It's got a whole supernatural vibe.
Right.
And the priest said, "Hey, you boys you better knock this off, because you don't know what you're messing around with. You think you're in this building and, oh, here's the ghost of somebody who used to live here. But the priest said, I'm just telling you that there's an evil spiritual world out there that's out to destroy you. And if I were you guys, I wouldn't be messing around with this stuff." And they left that in the show because it's kind of creepy,
Sure.
But I thought, later on, the priest is onto something there. That's probably the best way to say it, is that there are angelic beings, both good, who've been obedient to the Lord, and evil, who've rebelled against the Lord, led by Satan, who are out there trying to destroy people. And it's a reality that I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's worthwhile being aware of it at least.
Angelic beings. They're mentioned almost 300 times in the Bible, so it's not like it's a passing fancy. Anyone who is familiar with the scriptures doesn't have to think too hard to recall a story that involves angels. Is the Bible enough evidence, because we're trying to prove reality here, to secure or prove the reality of angels?
Again, the word "prove" is very slippery. That's
why I put it in there.
Yeah, I'm not real optimistic about the ability to prove anything. You can use, there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics. Mark Twain said, you can use evidence to do whatever you want with. You're going to match the evidence that you've got in front of you up with the reality, the framework of reality that you already currently believe in. Hardly anybody, this is one of the points of Thomas Kuhn's Structures of Scientific Revolutions, not a believer, but he was talking about what do scientists need to change their mind? And his take was basically, it doesn't happen. Very, very slowly. So it usually takes generations worth of data, like coming to a system and saying, this system doesn't work, for Newtonian physics to be replaced by quantum physics. It took a long, long time for that. People don't change their mind. Those sorts of paradigm shifts, and he invented that word, doesn't happen. So what does it take to prove that angels exist? About the same that it would take to prove that they don't exist to somebody who believes in them. It just doesn't happen. Like I'm very skeptical about the possibility of evidences and data changing our minds. The question is, what story do you subscribe to? That's where this happens. It happens in a story that people live in. Now, you can live in the story of philosophical materialism, where there is nothing that exists except for what we can experience physically, what you can see with your eyes or hear with your ears or examine with microscopes. And in that case, there is nothing outside of what you see. You live, you eat, you sleep, you procreate to keep the species going, and then you die. Not in that order, but that's all that there is. The story that I subscribe to is a story which I trust in just as much as the philosophical materialist trusts in his story of materialism, which is the story of the Bible, the story that there's a God who created the world, everything, both seen and unseen, we confess in our creeds. And that means that there are spiritual beings. There are things that you can't experience physically that he's created. And that's the story that I subscribe to. And so it makes perfect sense in my story that people would experience these sorts of things.
So let's look at Luke chapter 1. Right away, early in the New Testament, the story of an angel who appears to Zechariah, and then the angel identifies himself. So he's not just some amorphous being. It's, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. That's the beginning of the story of the arrival of Jesus, and for that matter, John the Baptist. This early angel reference is one of 177 such references in the New Testament. It seems that angels were once seen and experienced, like Zechariah, or Joseph, who had an angel visit him, and I could go on with lots of examples. But we don't seem to have too many people who can say anything like that now. Has that kind of angel revelation or interaction, has that stopped?
No. Got instances where, one instance, of course, is your wife, Debbie, believes that she's had an experience like this. Look, if Debbie was a philosophical materialist, she would say, oh, that didn't happen. If Zechariah in the temple was a materialist, he'd say, oh, I can't eat pepperoni pizza before I go to bed the night before. This is showing up at work and seeing people talking to me here. I can't be doing that anymore. But instead, in his framework, in Debbie's framework, there is a spiritual world. And so the possibility is there that these sorts of things happen. Lots of people have experience of these things happen. Maybe it's something very dramatic, like what Debbie has experienced. It could be, or like this family that I mentioned to you, the haunting of their house or the demonic activity in their house. It could be something dramatic like that. It could be something less dramatic, like where you're unaware. Hebrews 13, that's what Hebrews 13:2 says, is that you entertain them, but you're just never aware of it. That maybe you might have a hint. I don't know. Maybe it's, I can't think of a good example, something that would maybe make you think, oh, that was kind of weird. But I think most of the time we're not aware that this sort of thing is happening, but it does happen. It does happen. And even when they're not visible, it doesn't mean that angels and demons are any less real for being invisible. That's a part of who they are. They can manifest themselves. In Scripture, sometimes they manifest themselves so they can be seen, or in Debbie's instance. But most of the time, we can't see them, but they're still there.
And then there are the fallen angels or demons, evil spirits. In the gospel accounts, they are active agents of evil. Sometimes they speak.
Right.
Sometimes they possess people. Are they still actively spreading evil among us today in the way that we read in the gospel accounts?
Well, the Bible says that they've been curtailed. The strong man has been bound. But you do see some of this, like this house haunting I've talked about. People who I've met and talked to who've come from parts of the world where Western secularism has not been prevalent have said, oh yeah, for sure. Like there's sub-Saharan Africa, you see lots of this stuff. Really weird, evil stuff happening that can't be explained. I was talking to somebody recently about the story of The Exorcist, and I can't remember who I was talking to, but it happened here in St. Louis, close to where we're recording. And the Lutheran pastors that started that and then didn't get much headway handed it off to the Catholic priest, some Catholic priest in St. Louis, who finished the exorcism, said their whole life, this is completely and absolutely true. This is, what you see in the movie is, it's been changed around so that people can't be identified, but a lot of that stuff actually happened. The guy to whom it happened to, the little kid who was demon possessed, it was a boy in real life, not a girl like in the movie, lived his whole life with the scars from this event. So yeah, it does happen. That's the first answer, although it has been curtailed. It has been held in check. When you look at the Bible, what's interesting, I think, in the story of the Bible is up until the Gospels, you don't see much demonic activity. A little bit here and there, but really when Jesus shows up, there's demons everywhere. Mark calls them unclean spirits. But they're all the time coming out of the woodwork, challenging Jesus, being defeated by Jesus. What's interesting is that Jesus dies and rises from the dead, ascends back to his Father, and all of a sudden, the demons, by and large, go away again. So in the book of Acts, you don't see much demonic activity. A little bit, but not like you do in the Gospels. Paul doesn't talk about demons hardly at all. Peter mentions them once.
Jesus talked a lot about demons.
A lot. He was grappling with them a lot. But so why is that? Why do they come out just in the four Gospels? And I think the answer probably has something to do with when God incarnate showed up, Satan was like, emptying the reserves. Let's go after this guy. And then once defeated, back to almost silence. There's a little bit of activity in Acts. Like I would say there's a little bit of activity even now. But God has curtailed, through the power of Christ, has curtailed to some degree the extent of damage that Satan and his forces can do.
So do you remember the story of Saul, Old Testament story of King Saul and his visit to a medium, sometimes I think referred to as the witch of Endor? That's in 1 Samuel chapter 28. He asks her to bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. Then he adds, bring up Samuel, the prophet Samuel, to me, or for me.
Right, who had died.
Yes, good point. In that chapter, Samuel appears and says to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? So is this a ghost of Samuel?
Yeah, this is one weird instance where you see the deceased soul of someone, the soul of a deceased person come back into reality. You know, what's intriguing about that story is that Saul is going to the witch of Endor who has what some versions of the Bible call a familiar spirit. That's, I think the King James Version calls it that, like a spirit who works with them to, tell fortunes, to mess with people. It looks like here, this woman has a spirit whose job it is to impersonate the souls of people who have come up. But when, she calls up, she goes and she calls Samuel up, and I think that she's probably anticipating it's going to be the spirit, the demon that works with her, impersonating Samuel. And in the story, she's shocked because it's not. It's actually Samuel himself. So she turns to Saul and she basically says, hey, what's going on here? Like, I'm in big trouble. Like, you've outlawed people like me. She realizes that what's going on. And Saul says, just calm down. I want to talk to Samuel. But it looks like she's not used to actually the ghost of the people she's called up. It's actually usually a demon. And so, Saul gets a message there. But this is actually maybe the exception that proves the rule. This is one time where it is a ghost of a deceased person and not merely a fallen angel impersonating a deceased person.
Okay, let's take the medium, the witch, out of the equation here. What about the Mount of Transfiguration? Peter, James, and John on the mount with Jesus, and suddenly they see Moses, who is long deceased, and Elijah, who is long deceased, talking with Jesus.
Right.
Were they ghosts?
Yeah, something like that.
What does something like that mean?
Well, so ghost is a tricky word, right? When people use the word ghost, they mean deceased dead people. And I've argued up until now that that's at least 99.5% of the time, it's not a ghost, it's an angel or a fallen angel. But you have it's clearly here in Transfiguration story, it's clearly Moses and Elijah. Are they in their bodies? It doesn't make any sense. Their bodies have been buried.
Can't be in their bodies.
Right, yeah. So it's something like that.
I guess they can't be in their bodies because Elijah was taken up bodily, was he not?
Yeah, I guess.
And Moses, they said, the Bible says, never found his body. So
maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe it was their bodies, but if not, it's something along these lines, right? The souls of deceased people in kind of a one-off experience. Yeah.
In John chapter 4, verse 24, John writes, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Angels are described in Hebrews 1, verse 14, as ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation. Proverbs 20:27 says, the spirit of man, that's a small s, not the Holy Spirit, the spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all his innermost parts. God is spirit, angels spirits, and man has a spirit. Well, that pretty much, I think, puts to rest for most people that there is a spiritual realm.
Right.
I think we're mostly settled on that. My question for you is, while we know that spirit and matter are arguably and certainly real, could it be said that the eternal spiritual realm is in fact more demonstrably real than the temporal physical realm?
Well, there's two mistakes we could make here. One is the materialist mistake, which is to say that the physical world is the most important. In fact, it's all there is. There are people who believe in the spiritual world, but because they grow up and live in a materialist context, might say, well, I believe in the spiritual world, but it's not as important as the physical. That's one error. The other error is the Platonic error, which is to say, the idealist error, to say that the spiritual is real, the non-physical is real, and the physical world is fake. The Police or Sting song, I can't remember which, I've mentioned it in here before. We are spirits in a material world. That sort of Eastern idea that what's real is our spirits and that our bodies are kind of fake. Both of those are errors. The Bible never pits the physical versus the spiritual. God created us to be both physical and spiritual. He created his universe to have both the seen and the unseen things about it. And the apex of this, of course, is God himself, who, yes, is a spirit, but the way we know him is through Jesus of Nazareth, who is a human being, both physical and spiritual, like the rest of us. And so it's not a case of which one's more important. God created us in both ways, and they're both real. One is not more real than the other. They're both real and can't do without the other. And so I think the biblical way to think about it is that there's parity between the seen and the unseen, and none of us make sense without both of those things.
So when we talk about reality, I think for most people the starting point is we knock on the table. Yep, it's real. You hug your wife. Yep, she's real. You go to work and face the tasks that you face. They're all real. They can be stressful. It's all material. It's all made up of atoms and molecules. And then comes questions about angels and demons and ghosts and human spirits and the Spirit of God. And we can't attach any atoms or molecules to that. But in the Nicene Creed, there is a place where the church confesses that Christ is very God of very God, maybe translated true God of true God, begotten, not made, of one substance with the Father. So just because the spiritual beings are not made of matter does not necessarily mean that they don't have any substance. Is that a correct statement?
Right. Yeah. And if you use the word substance there as a philosophical materialist world, you say that doesn't make any sense. They don't have substance. But the word substance there, essence, or reality is a good word. They both have reality.
Reality is a good word, yeah.
Yeah, they both are real and they both truly exist. They aren't projections of our mind. They aren't figments of our imagination. They aren't metaphorical tools that we use to help us understand our existence better. This world of the Spirit actually really exists.
Let me ask you one more quick question here, because this is kind of my opinion. I don't know if there's any basis of truth in it or not. But on those occasions when material human beings encounter the supernatural, I'm thinking about John in his Revelation in chapter 1. He sees the risen Christ, and he describes him as bright and shining, his face shining and his feet shining, and it's just glorious. It sounds like it's otherworldly, and I get the feeling that it's extra real. It's overwhelmingly real, which is why I asked the question, do you think that the supernatural is, as it suggests, above the natural physical realm that we have here, so that those who go into eternity in Jesus Christ are going to experience a reality that is overwhelming compared to everyday life here? That's kind of what I'm expecting. And is there a basis for that?
Maybe more powerful, not more real, and not always more powerful. Some people entertain angels unaware. There's not this shocking vision and they're like falling down on their face because there's this bright light shooting everywhere. They entertain, they spend time with an angel and they're not even really truly aware of it. It's that hidden. I would say to understand the relationship between the supernatural and the natural, or between the physical and the spiritual, it's always important for us humans to go back to Jesus, who is the intersection of supernatural and natural. He's infinite. He's completely divine. He's the creator of the universe. Yet he exists in humanity like me and you. He has armpits. He has an accent. He is to sight. People who saw him didn't say, "Oh, we have to fall down and worship this guy." He's a construction worker. And which is the most real part of Jesus? His body or his soul? I'd say, well, they're both indispensable to each other. And I think that's probably the best way to say it about the topic we're talking about today. Although people who sometimes have a vision of the supernatural will be overwhelmed by it, that's possible. What they're getting a glimpse of is the power of the Almighty. It doesn't mean that it's more real just because Jesus isn't more real for being a spirit than he is for having a body. They're both necessary.
Well, there's your reality. Thanks for listening to this episode of Craving Answers, Craving God. We're grateful for the many expressions of appreciation that we have received from listeners. You can share your thoughts on our podcast by sending an email to this address, cacg@stjamesglencarbon.org. For Pastor Aaron Miller and production manager Larry O'Leary, I'm Chuck Rather.